Good evening. Mike Holler is the author of The Constitution Made Easy. It is a modern English translation of the Constitution, placed side by side with the original for easy comparison. The goal is a better understanding and greater retention. Mike has traveled the country teaching seminars on the Constitution and has spoken and done book signings at over 200 Tea Party events. At this seminar, Mike will present the Constitution as it was originally intended, in contrast to the perversions of our present government. He intends to show that, first, if our elected officials honored the Constitution and their oaths of office, there would never have been a Tea Party or an Occupy movement. There would have been no need. We do not live in a free country right now, and would have difficulty even imagining what freedom would look like. But we plan to talk about that at length. Crony capitalism, or fascism, is the prevailing form of government in the United States today, and it is the enemy of freedom. The Tea Parties and the Occupy movement have both been mischaracterized by the media and by each other. The major political parties are making an effort to co-opt both movements in order to neutralize their messages. The Tea Party and the Occupy movement have more principles in common than those that divide them. Please give Mike a warm welcome to show that we really appreciate him coming to speak to us and that we are genuinely interested in his ideas and in the United States Constitution.
Well, thank you. It really is a privilege to be here, and if you think about this event, however little small event it is in Colorado Springs, is historic. Imagine if the news tonight said, Occupy Wall Street meets the Tea Party. I mean, that would send shockwaves all around the country, because we are viewed as coming at things from diametrically opposite points of view, and that's the way they want it to appear. The very last thing that our government would like to see would be for us to find common ground and work together. But I think that you're going to find tonight that there is more that unites us than divides us, and I hope that's the case. I wanted to start out tonight by talking about, well, first I wanted to thank Trace and Hossein and Christy and those of you that put this on. Look at the amount of effort that has gone into this, and I think that the planners of this deserve a little hand for the... And I want to thank all of you for coming out. And it is a little bit warmer here than it is in the park. So not all bad, right? Here's what I believe about you. Now, you guys are free to correct me now or later if I'm wrong, but here's what I think about you. I believe you love freedom. Now, we may not all have exactly the same picture of what freedom looks like, but I believe you love freedom. I believe you love America. I love America. Last time I looked, there were no guards keeping us in. We'd be free to go to any other country if we chose. Now, we don't like where America's going. We don't like some of the things that are happening in America today. But we would like to save this country and make it a shining light of freedom around the world. I believe you want a better future for your children, like I want a better future for my children. And that's why I leave my children a month at a time and tour the country and talk about the United States Constitution. Now, again, we may not exactly agree on what will make a better life for our children, but we know we want a better life for them, don't we? I think that fundamentally, you know something is terribly wrong with America, and that's why you're occupying the park, and that's why you're occupying, your counterparts are occupying Wall Street, is you have a gut feeling, and I'm not sure that all of you, I mean, here's something about the Tea Party. The Tea Party is not in agreement. There's a disparate bunch of people. We don't agree on half the stuff we talk about. I think there's differences amongst occupiers. I don't think they all see things exactly the same way. But you have a gut instinct that says there's something terribly wrong when tax dollars in the hundreds of billions are being given to big corporations to bail them out. Can we agree that something's terribly wrong when that's happening? I've traveled the country with Tea Party Express on all 5 national tours, 250, 300, over 300 cities. The side of the bus says, honor the Constitution, no more bailouts. Now, how about that as a starting place for common ground? Most of the Tea Partiers, this Tea Party's been around for a little over 3 years. You guys have been around for 3 weeks, 3 months, maybe. 3 months, maybe. When the Tea Party started, people got up off the couch and went to tea parties. They didn't even know what they were protesting. They didn't. They just had a gut feeling something was wrong. And over time, they're beginning to get a better picture of what's wrong. I think that's going to happen with your movement as well. Now, I came to teach the Constitution. It's our Constitution, not the Tea Party's Constitution. It's not the Republicans' Constitution. It's not Obama's Constitution. It's not Bush's Constitution. It's not Sandra Day O'Connor's Constitution. It's our Constitution of the United States. So I've come to teach that. I want to spend most of the time on that because that's my area of expertise, and that's where I'd like to address and field questions. But I want to tell you how happy I am that you are all intellectually curious enough to learn more about the Constitution, even though it's coming from a person that is pretty suspicious. Intellectual curiosity, the desire to know truth, the desire to find things out, I think was one of the highest qualities of a human being. So I thank you for coming out. I think that Occupy and the Tea Party have a lot in common. Here's a few things, besides the things we talked about, loving freedom, loving America. We don't trust the federal government. I mean, are we in agreement on that? We don't trust them. We believe that bailouts are absurd. Do we agree on that? On all 5 tours, our bus says no more bailouts. That's one of the central points of the Tea Party. I believe that both groups have been misrepresented, misunderstood by the media and by each other because we're naturally suspicious of anybody that's got a longer, grayer beard than I've got, Carl. But I want to tell you something else that I think was a little study as I was getting ready. I learned something about the first Tea Party. Y'all remember the Boston Tea Party where the tea went in the harbor? Okay. Now the revolt was caused by a desire to not pay the king's taxes. But whose tea did they dump in the harbor? The East India Company, which at the time was the largest multinational corporation on Wall Street. So I think that there's another little interesting connection between the Tea Party and Wall Street. The modern Tea Party, not the one that dumped the tea in the harbor, but the modern Tea Party that I've spoken at, has been talking and talking and talking about a revolution for about 3 years. Well, it looks to me like Occupy is starting one. So I do believe that we have a great deal in common. Now, there's 5 stages of any project or any movement, and you'll recognize these, and you'll try to figure out where you are. Now, these apply to the Tea Party, Occupy, a government program, a new business enterprise. Here are the 5 stages. 1, euphoria and excitement. 2, disappointment. Didn't take long, did it? 3, the search for the guilty. 4, the punishment of the innocent. And 5, rewards for the uninvolved. That's meant to be funny. But it isn't too far from wrong when we say the first 2 stages are excitement and disappointment. When the rubber meets the road and the real work's getting done, it does get hard and gets to be something of a drag. Well, we're going to go on and talk about the Constitution, but before we do, I just want to kind of put it into perspective that in our civic education, as we approach the Constitution, there are some other things that are important. One is the Declaration of Independence. The language in the Declaration of Independence is stern, tough language, and it is true in all times, in all places. It wasn't just true one time in America. It's true at all times, that when any form of government becomes destructive, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. And we could be approaching such a time in America. I want to talk about the political spectrum because I don't know what you've been taught about the political spectrum, but I would like to show my views on that and how I see that shaping up. The founders, you know, some people disparage the founders. Young people going to college today, I've got 7 kids, 4 of them that are at or beyond college age. So I've had the privilege, I'm not sure that was the word, of having their friends in my home. And when they go off to college, they get their heads filled with some ideas. And one of the ideas they have is that our founders were dead white European males of no real importance. They are slaveholders and bad guys all around. But I think when we go back and look at our founders, we're going to find that they had a great deal of wisdom. So we're going to share some of that wisdom tonight. I think some of it will surprise you. And then we're going to go through the Constitution. And I want to tonight talk about what the Constitution is. Most people don't know what it is. Our elected officials who take the oath, you know that oath of office, that funny thing they take every couple of years? I solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's not what they mean. They mean I solemnly swear that I will support and defend my reputation, my office, my reelection campaign, the bridge they're going to name after me. But they take this oath of office. And this Constitution that our founders drafted for us has great wisdom that I think will surprise you. So let's take the next slide, and Jose's going to be running the slideshow for me tonight, and I'll just keep nodding at him as we want to keep moving through this. We've got to do 3 slides a minute to stay on schedule. So keep going. Declaration of Independence, and we're going to read some of this together, and I have to kind of look up at the screen because I normally have my laptop in front of me here, but this is important stuff. If you haven't read it in a while, it won't hurt you to see it again. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these, and I want you to hold it right here for just a second, Jose, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We've all heard that, haven't we? Next slide. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Why do we have governments instituted among men? To secure the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And notice that paragraph says, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's not the full list of our rights. That's just a general overall description of some of them. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. And where do they get their powers? From the consent of the governed. Hey, I got news for Washington, D.C. I no longer consent. Deriving their just powers. What are just powers? They're not just powers. They're righteous powers. There's only certain powers that they're supposed to have, and they get them from the consent of the governed. Next slide. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to us shall seem most likely to affect our safety and happiness. Next slide. Now, prudence will say that governments that are long established should not be changed for little bitty causes, and accordingly, all experience has shown that men and women are more disposed or more likely to suffer while the evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms of government to which we've become accustomed. But when a long, long train of abuses and usurpations, I love these words, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design, reveals a plan to reduce us under absolute despotism. It is our right, it is our duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for our future security. Such has been the patient suffering of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former system of government. Now, they're throwing off the government of England. They're going to go up against the biggest power on earth. And they said, we've suffered all we're going to suffer. Next slide. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. By the way, when I put this presentation together, George Bush was president. So I wasn't picking on any one person. The history of the present, and King George, you know how everybody called him King George, is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let these facts be submitted to a candid world. I'm not going to submit all the facts, but let's go on. At that point, he lists all the things that the king had done, how he had sent swarms of agents into the colonies to eat out their sustenance. Does that sound like anybody we know? In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress. That means we wrote them and we begged them and we asked, and we asked nicely, and we asked out loud, and we protested in the most humble terms. But our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury, like calling out the police, the National Guard. Next. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States, and I want you to follow something here because this is important to the Constitution. Look how many times states is plural. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world. Who would that be? Would that be Nancy Pelosi? That would be God. Appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude, the rightness of our intentions, due in the name and by the authority of the people of these colonies, plural, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, plural, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for support of this declaration, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, who's that? God. We mutually pledge each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Now, many of the signers had to make good on that pledge. Many of them lost their lives, their fortunes, and their honor. There's some similarities to today. Why would I go through that whole reading if it didn't have something to do with where we are right now? We have an imperial Congress that does whatever it wants. There's no regard for state sovereignty. There's no regard for our liberty. And there's no regard for the United States Constitution. I travel the country. I meet legislators, state and national legislators. I talk to them about the Constitution. I'll tell you how much they know about the Constitution. Nothing. Nothing. It is just like getting married. Sometimes I tell them this. I said, are you married? And they said, yes. Imagine getting married. And just pick one. We're going to say the groom is standing at the altar. The bride's not there. And he says, I promise to love, honor, and protect, and cherish, for better, for worse, sickness and health, as long as we both shall live. But he's never met the girl. It's worse than that. He's never going to meet the girl. That's what it's like to take an oath to defend the Constitution you haven't read and you're never going to read. We have an overreaching executive who exerts unprecedented power, deciding who to bomb, who to invade, when and where, with absolute impunity. Recently, this was a constitutional crisis you may not be aware of, but Barack Obama made appointments while Congress was in recess. That's what the Constitution says he can do. The only problem is Congress was not in recess. And his answer was, oh, well, they're not doing anything anyway. Now, that may be true. I wouldn't dispute that. But the point is that it was unconstitutional. Next point. Our highest court gets it wrong at least half the time and decides many cases 5-4. I stand here today going to say something that I never thought I would say in 100 years. If you're familiar with the Supreme Court and you know who the Supreme Court justices are, the one I'm most likely to disagree with is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There was a recent case decided 8-1, and she was the only person who voted against the majority. And the case said that if the police are in your area and they're looking for a drug suspect and they hear some scurrying in your house or hear your toilet flush, they can barge right in. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the only person with enough respect for our liberties and the Constitution to write a dissenting opinion. When the Supreme Court can get something that fundamental wrong, 8-1, we're in deep, deep trouble. We have a federal government that reaches into every aspect of our lives, telling us literally things about our bathroom habits, how many gallons we can flush the toilet with, what kind of light bulb we can have on while we're doing our business. This is reaching into this was absolutely not what our founders intended, and you're going to see that from the Constitution. Here's another similarity. We've been suffering while the evils are sufferable, but there's a point where you get mad enough to occupy Wall Street. A long train of abuses and usurpations have revealed their plan to reduce us under absolute despotism. Any of these terms that are unfamiliar? Despotism. If you don't know what it means, it's just like what it sounds. Like a tyrant is going to have us under his thumb and go like this. Imagine a boot on your neck forever. That's despotism. We have petitioned for redress. The Tea Party started out 3 years ago, and all they did was make fun of us. You guys started out a few months ago, and all they've done is marginalize you. But we have petitioned for redress in humble and peaceful terms. I think Tea Parties are generally milder and quieter and more, mellow because we're old. But this, what you have done is so far been petitioning for change. You want something new. Okay, you turn over a couple of cars. That's nothing. We're not getting serious yet. Wait till we get serious. There we go. This is my fundamental point. It is our right and our duty to throw this government off by whatever method works. Slide. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the political spectrum, and here's a place where we may not have perfect accord, but we'll move past it and get right into the Constitution. What are all the isms? All the communism, socialism, fascism, left, right, Democrat, progressive. I think that all those terms are designed to be confusing. Here's how it's taught in some universities that the liberal or conservative. The liberal is more inclined to accept and promote change. The conservative is less inclined to accept and promote change. On the very left, we have communists. On the very right, we have fascists. In the middle are Democrats, Republicans, and moderates. Is that what you've been told? I mean, most of us learned something like that. I got a question for you. Where would you put someone on there who believes that government shouldn't tell them what to do? There's no place on there, is there? Okay, next slide. Here's another way to look at it. No government, limited government, total government. And notice that I put the no government on the left. Most people would put the no government on the right. You know what I think fascist and communist are? Names you call somebody that disagrees with you. Right? Anybody or somebody who you can't answer their argument, so you answer them with an epithet. But if you look at the whole political spectrum, everything will fit on here. Anarchists fit on the left. No government. Limited government is like a constitution. Total government, fascists and communists are all over there. They have more in common that unites them than that they disagree about. Historically, communists and fascists have sometimes fought each other, but all they were fighting for was for total power over the people. Next slide. Statism is another name for the total control of the government. And that's a term I'll use a lot tonight, statism. And the reason I have the word legion there is because there are so many forms of statism. It could be a kingdom. It could be an emir. It could be like the Saudi family. It can be our dear leader in North Korea. There's just all kinds of statism. And they will have more in common than they have that divides them. The U.S. Constitution, I believe, is designed to create enough government to preserve and protect our rights, but not enough government to crush us. Next slide. But the Republican National Committee doesn't see it that way. They're moving in the direction of statism. Next slide. The Democratic National Committee doesn't see it that way. They're moving in the direction of statism. And progress, as defined by most progressives, is more government, more government, more government. If government caused the problem, would government be the place to go for the solution? I believe that government is a disease masquerading as its own cure. Government caused the meltdown. Government caused Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to break down. Government caused the financial meltdown on Wall Street. Then government comes along and says, let us fix it. And we said, enough! Enough! You caused the problem, you can't fix it. So here's a few isms: communism, Marxism, fascism, socialism. I just want to do a couple things with these slides. Marx is the author of communism. In Italy, Benito Mussolini, the famous fascist, said he was a socialist. You see how these are starting to link together? Next slide. They really could all be linked together, keep going, as statism. Just another way of saying, let the state solve the problem that the state caused. Worship of the state. Here's some wisdom from the founders. Thomas Jefferson's experience has shown that even under the best forms of government, the people entrusted with power have, in time and by slow operations, perverted it into tyranny. This is the natural order of things. Jefferson also said, the natural order of things is for government to advance and freedom to yield. Government and freedom occupy the same real estate. The larger government gets, the smaller liberty is. Our founders intended that government would be an island in a sea of liberty. Today, I believe we have an island of privilege in a sea of government. A few more quotes here. Danger from all men. By the way, Thomas Jefferson, primary author of the Declaration of Independence, also the third president of the United States. John Adams, second president of the United States. There is danger from all men. The only maxim, the only truth of a free government ought to be to trust no man living with enough power to endanger the public liberty. Daniel Webster was not one of the founders, but this one is a very good quote. He's an early statesman. From the inattention of the people to the concerns of their government, from their carelessness and negligence, I must confess I do apprehend some danger. I fear they may place too implicit a confidence in their public servants and fail properly to scrutinize their conduct, that in this way us, may be made the dupes of designing men and become the instruments of our own undoing. We're not watching them. Madison, it is proper to take alarm at the first. Madison, the father of the Constitution and the fourth president. It is proper to take alarm at the first experiment on our liberties. We hold this prudent jealousy to be the first duty of citizens and one of the noblest characters of our recent revolution. The truth is that all men having power ought to be mistrusted. Wherein excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. No man is safe in his opinions, his person, his faculties, or his possession. How about this one? Wherever there is interest and power to do wrong, wrong will generally be done. This second quote. Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedoms of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. Next slide. Great one from Daniel Webster. I love this one. I'm going to paraphrase him slightly. Okay, see if you can tell where I twist him just a little bit. Good intentions will always be pleaded for any assumption of power. The Constitution was made to safeguard the people against the dangers of good intentions. What did your mother tell you the road to hell was paved with? There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but by God they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but by God they mean to be masters. Could you tell where I kind of tweaked him a little? So now we're going to jump right into the Constitution. I think we need to know what the Constitution is before we can know what it says. It is a binding legal agreement or a contract. The parties are the separate states and the people of those states, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. The members of the newly created government were not technically parties. What were they? Next slide. By their oaths, they became trustees. They weren't parties. They weren't there when the agreement was made. They got elected into office and they became public servants and they hold a public trust. That's the way it was used to be understood before they decided they were king over us. Our founders created a general government to handle only a few areas that the states could not reasonably manage. Now stay there for just a second. This is what the Constitution is. It's an agreement to create a general government to handle only a few areas that the states, like Colorado, Maryland, Virginia, New York, could not reasonably handle on their own. Remember in the Declaration at the end that 9 times the states were referred to in the plural. They considered themselves sovereign until the federal government finally crushed them. So our founders created not a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. With apologies to Abraham Lincoln. That's something he said 70 years later. They created a government of the states, by the states, and for the states. And if you want to learn one thing tonight about the Constitution, that's what it did. It created a government of the states, by the states, and for the states. They created a government to serve them. They would have never intended to create a government to dictate to them. But if you look at the Colorado budget, I get involved with the legislators going, you guys are spending too much. They go, but look, 3/4 of what we spend because the federal government tells us we have to. Probably 1/3 to 1/4 of the budget in Colorado is money Colorado legislators have any real control over. Okay, so it's a binding legal agreement. We know who the parties are. Every agreement has parties. The parties are the states. What does a legal agreement mean? Well, it means what the parties to the agreement meant for it to mean at the time they agreed to it. In legal terms, they say a legal agreement memorializes our understanding. Is anybody in the room a lawyer? Anybody in the room have a lawyer? Anybody in the room hate a lawyer? Okay, but I've done this presentation in front of lawyers, and they'll tell you this is exactly right, that a legal agreement is intended to memorialize our understanding. It isn't as much so that we can go to court when somebody defaults. It's so that nobody does default. We both understand you're supposed to bring me bricks every Tuesday, and I pay you $100, and we write that down. So when Tuesday comes and you didn't bring my bricks, I can say, you're supposed to bring me bricks every Tuesday. And you can say, well, I don't remember that, and I show you the contract. So that's what a contract is. What does it mean? Well, what did the parties mean for it to mean? That's what the Constitution means. It doesn't mean what we want it to mean. It doesn't mean what our legislators try to make it mean. It means what it meant when the parties wrote it. What did it mean to form a more perfect union? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. More perfect is a comparative. More perfect than what? Anybody know? More perfect than what? More than what? More perfect than the king's tyranny, yes, but we already done something in between. More perfect than our first Constitution. We had a Constitution first. We had one before it. It was the Articles of Confederation. Next slide. So we were going to create a stronger alliance, but a stronger alliance of independent nation states. How do we know that? Well, the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, that was our first Constitution. What was the Treaty of Paris? Not the one that ended the Vietnam War. The Treaty of Paris ended the Revolutionary War, 1783. The Treaty of Paris and the Constitution refer to the states and often by name. In the new introduction to the next edition of my book that's coming out in a month or so, I say, we could really rename our country. We really could rename it, and all we'd have to do is take out one letter. We could call it the United States of America. The states no longer have any autonomy. So United States was intended to be plural, and it's used that way every time in these documents, and that's exactly how our founders understood it, and it's exactly how it was understood for the first half of the life of our country. So it was going to be a stronger alliance, but it was going to be stronger but strictly limited, or what lawyers say is cabined. And how do we know that? Well, we know it from two evidences, and here's where I've got to kind of fall back on my training, but there's two kinds of evidence we bring to bear on this. The internal evidence is from the Constitution itself. The external evidence is from the other documents, the ratifying documents, the comments of the writers, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, the notes from the convention, the notes from the ratifying conventions. Those are all external evidence, but they have to be contemporaneous. It can't be what the newspaper said yesterday. So here we're going to go through some internal evidence, and I think this is really going to be a fun exercise for you. Do y'all have a copy of the Constitution? I think since we're at the library, I'm not allowed to sell my books, but I can loan you one. Y'all, can I loan you a Constitution? Somebody give me a little help passing these out. Then we can look at a few parts of it together. And I also have some business cards back there, so if y'all are interested in getting a copy of the book or corresponding with me, my business card has my personal email and the cell phone that rings on my hip. Okay, so you can get a hold of me anytime. I wanted to say one more thing about it, but it's Alzheimer's creeping in. Okay, here's a fun part. Now I need a copy. How many of you have heard about the 10th Amendment? The 10th Amendment. People talk about the 10th Amendment. All powers not granted to the government by this Constitution are reserved to the states or the people. And so the 10th Amendment, people go, hey, if the federal government wasn't given the power by the Constitution, then the states still have the power, or the people have the power, the federal government doesn't have it. Well, they're right, but we don't have to wait for the 10th Amendment. Here's the first 5 words in the Constitution, and you'll find them on page 5. The first 5 words of the Constitution say, and I'll use the original version, all legislative powers herein granted. All legislative power is herein granted. I spoke to a class of 7th and 8th graders the other day, and I asked them the question, what does herein granted mean? And then I thought, wait a minute, they're 7th and 8th graders, they won't know. One girl raises her hand, I called on her, and she said, granted in here? I said, honey, come on up, sit up front here. You're going to be my pet. Wait a minute, you know, nowadays saying that could get you in trouble, couldn't it? All legislative powers granted in here will be vested in a Congress. Not all legislative powers whatsoever. Next slide. So what are powers? Powers are delegated authority. And the authorities are who? Us. And so if we don't delegate some of our authority to the government, they don't have it. That's what power is. By the way, if somebody ever says to you, does the government have the right to do this? You can always say no. Government doesn't have rights. People have rights. What does government have? Power. So only people are ever said to have rights. And rights are, according to our founders, and you know it's okay to be an atheist in America. Doesn't make any difference because according to the founders, our rights were given to us by somebody other than government. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they could have been given to you by Shirley MacLaine. But as long as they weren't given to you by government. So governments are never said to have rights. And you can read until you're blue in the face in the founders, and you'll never find a time that any of the founders say that the governments have rights. Governments have power, and power is dangerous. Okay, the next way we know. How do we know from the internal evidence? We've got the first 5 words. Then we have Article 1, Section 8. You know, I'll ask a legislator, where are most of the powers of Congress granted? You know what they'll tell me? Well, it's either in the House or the Senate. No, the powers of Congress were granted by the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8. So go there for a second. Article 1, Section 8 is on page... You'd think after I wrote this, I'd memorize this, right? Page 12 and 13. Now you see on page 12, the parchment color, that's the original Constitution, word for word from the government's archives. You can go to the website and get this exact wording. On the right is the modern English translation. How many of you ever saw a book called Shakespeare Made Easy or No Fear Shakespeare? Okay, same kind of idea is to put it into modern English. But if you look at the bottom of the page, it says Congress will have power. It says Section 8. Congress shall have power to do all these different things. To collect taxes, borrow money, regulate trade, establish rules for becoming a naturalized citizen. On the next page, coining money, punish counterfeiters, establish post offices. All right, there's quite a few things listed here. And depending on how you list it, and I've made lots of lists, there's a certain number of powers granted. If post offices and post roads are 2 powers instead of 1, and if patents and copyrights are 2 powers instead of 1, no matter how you number it, Congress has fewer than 30 powers. Fewer than 30. How many do they have today? I mean, I ask people all the time. I ask congressmen, I go, tell me something Congress can't do. I mean, other than make a rock so heavy they can't lift it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Is there any, if they made a law against chewing gum tomorrow, it'd be against the law to chew gum. If they made a law against heterosexual activity tomorrow, there'd be a law against it. There's just nothing outside of their power, nothing outside of their arrogance. So Article 1, Section 8, here's my question for you. Anybody here been to Independence Hall? A couple? Good. I mean, these people sat down in Independence Hall in Philadelphia in the summertime. Who's from the Midwest? Anybody from the Midwest? Anybody from the South? All right. You know how hot the summers are? Yeah. Before air conditioning, you're inside, you close the windows, and you meet all summer long. And you sweat. And you write out this document by hand. And then you talk about it, and you decide this ain't it, and you tear it up, you throw it aside, and you do it over. And you do this over and over and over for months. Why would you list all of the powers of Congress if you meant for them to be unlimited? Would you really waste all that sweat doing that? No. You just say, Congress shall have unlimited power to tell me what to do, when to wake up, when to go to bed, how many gallons I can flush my outhouse with. They didn't have indoor plumbing. All right, next slide. The next place we find is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. This is a really very cool clause. That's on page 16 and 17. This is really, when you ask a congressman what laws they're allowed to make, they say, we're allowed to make all laws that are necessary and proper. Well, it sounds pretty good, right? Let's read the whole thing. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Okay. How many powers outside of the Constitution were they given? None. They were given the powers that are in the Constitution. So when they say the necessary and proper clause expanded their powers or gave them some kind of implied power, it is quite the opposite when you read the whole sentence. They were given the powers that were necessary to implement, to turn the powers into law. They were given the powers to write laws consistent with the powers that had just been listed. If we hadn't had that clause, they wouldn't have had law-making ability. They would have just had power. Now they have the power to turn power into law. Next slide. Article 6, Section 2, this Constitution, you've heard, how many of you have heard that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land? All right, this is where it comes from. Article 6, Section 2, this Constitution and the laws made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land. That's on page 34 and 35. If you go to Article 6, Section 2, and look on the original parchment on the left, this is word for word just the way our founders wrote it. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. But what does it not say? It does not say anything we feel like doing shall be the supreme law of the land. It says laws that are made in pursuance. Somebody tell me what pursuance means. Laws made in pursuance. According to. Laws made according to the Constitution. Laws made that conform with the Constitution. Laws that get their power from a provision in the Constitution. Okay, next slide. Then we have the external evidence. Oh, then we have Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. Oh, we did that one. Laws in pursuance. Then finally, we have the 10th Amendment. Good. The 10th Amendment is on page 42 and 43. I call the 10th Amendment the backstop. Just in case a few wild pitches get past the catcher. You know, we tried stopping you when we said all legislative power herein granted. We tried stopping you when we showed you the enumerated powers. We tried stopping you when we said Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, the foregoing powers. Those are like bookends. Here we say we're going to grant them. Here we grant them. Here we say we just granted them. Then we have Article 6 that says pursuance thereof. Just in case you didn't understand that, we have the 10th Amendment. Let me just read that in the modern English. And you can, here's the beauty of the book, is if I wrote something in the modern translation that's not right, where's the original? Right across the page. Okay, so you can use this and you can rely on it. You can show it to people. And they can say, no, it doesn't say that. Oh, yeah, well, look across the page, see what it says. The powers that are not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are retained by the separate states or by the people. What part of that are you having trouble understanding? Yeah. Okay, next page, next slide. So now we also have, that's all the internal evidence in the Constitution. There might be more, but those are the highlights. The external evidence were the things we were talking about. I'm just going to give you a couple of quotes. One more slide. We have the notes of the convention, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers. Anybody even ever heard of those?
No.
Oh, yeah. You know, there were people that didn't want the Constitution to be ratified. Why didn't they want it to be ratified? They thought it would give the federal government too much power. Anybody name a famous anti-federalist that said, give me liberty or give me death? Patrick Henry. Beautiful, thank you. Patrick Henry. He said when they had the Constitutional Convention on, he said he smelt a rat. When it was time to ratify it, he said in the state convention, I would rather cut my hand off than put it to that piece of paper. He wrote avidly against the Constitution for fear it would give the federal government too much power. So those are some of the, and we have the ratifying documents from each state. The authority of the Constitution, when the founders were done in Philadelphia and they signed their names, great speech by Benjamin Franklin when he said, you've got to sign it. Never speak badly of it when you leave this room. He gave them a great speech. Everybody that was there signed it. How much authority did it have at that point? None. When did it get authority? When the states ratified it. So those ratifying documents of the states, James Madison once said, when somebody asked him about the Constitution, he said, don't ask me. He said, read the words themselves. If they're not clear enough, go to the ratifying conventions of the states, because that's where they got all of their authority. Okay, next slide. Here's a couple of quotes from James Madison, Federalist number 45. The powers dedicated to the proposed government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. What part of few and defined are you having trouble understanding? The former, the few and defined powers, will be exercised mostly on external objects such as war and peace and negotiations with foreign powers. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and prosperities of the people and the internal order and improvement of the states. So where was most of the power supposed to lie? In Washington, D.C. or Denver? Denver. And here's a beautiful thing about that, folks. You know, it's hard to get a federal senator or a federal congressman's attention. It's easy to get a state legislator's attention. If you guys go camp out in a state legislator's yard, he's going to hear what you have to say, right? And I can always get an appointment with my state legislator. It's pretty hard to get a hold of Lamborn and those guys. All right, next slide. So what does it mean? It meant we covered more perfect union. Now we're going to talk about general welfare. Here's one of the most misunderstood clauses in the Constitution. If you get your mind around this, then you'll know what the Constitution is talking about. General welfare means the equal well-being of the member states. Period. That's what it means. It doesn't mean the general welfare of each of us. The government is not our mother and father, and it's not its responsibility to take care of us. Its responsibility, the federal government's responsibility, was to make sure that every state was treated equally. We could go to Denver and ask them to take care of us, but we were not. Washington, D.C. was supposed to only provide general welfare or general well-being of the member states according to the Constitution. And when you see how well this design works out, you'll see how easily we could affect government if they still honored the Constitution and their oath. So how do we know that general welfare means the equal well-being of the member states? And you know my drill by now. It's the internal evidence and the external evidence, and we'll do a little bit of both. The internal evidence is the text of the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution. How many of you memorized it in school? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Yes, you did. I'm not going to call on you. You can tell me. You had to memorize it in school. All right, the preamble is at the very beginning here on pages 4 and 5. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. This is a term that Congress has used to allow them power to do anything they wanted to do that the people who put them into office wanted them to do. So if they could get a coalition of special interest groups to say, gay marriage is illegal, by God, gay marriage is going to be illegal. If they could get a coalition of special interest groups to say alcohol is illegal, by God, alcohol is going to be illegal. marijuana, and on it goes, you see. So, by the way, you probably can't tell this from me, but I don't like the government telling us what we can drink and what we can smoke. Any? Okay, so internal evidence, the preamble, and also that same thing is in 1.8.1. That same phrase is in 1.8.1 on page 12. Because the preamble itself is just a preamble. It was written by the Committee of Style after the Constitution was approved. It was just a description of what the Constitution was going to do. But here it is in the body. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and provide for two things: the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Here's what you need to know. Common defense and general welfare are headings. They're categories of powers. They're not powers themselves. The powers then are going to be detailed in the next 18 paragraphs. Common defense and general welfare could just as easily say general defense and common welfare of the what? Of the people? Of the states. So that's one place we know. Now let's go to some external evidence. We're going to go to the Articles of Confederation. This was our first Constitution for 8 years. You cannot overstate the value of the Articles of Confederation. While our founders were in Philadelphia drafting the new Constitution, what Constitution were they bound by? Until the new one was ratified, which one were they bound by? That one. Okay. Here's what the Articles of Confederation say in Article 3. The said states hereby severally enter into a firm league of friendship with each other. With who? Each other. The states. For their common defense. Whose common defense? The states. And the security of their liberties and their mutual and general welfare. Now, if it's defined clearly in the Articles of Confederation and there's no new definition given in the Constitution, what definition should we apply? We would apply the definition that was underlying it, right? Next slide. Now here's something from James Madison in the Virginia Resolutions of 1798. Just so that you know that these phrases were copied from the Articles of Confederation into the Constitution. He says so. A spirit has been manifested by the federal government. Oh my God, you mean it started back then? To enlarge its powers by forced constructions of certain general phrases, which, having been copied from the very limited grant of powers in the former Articles of Confederation, were the less liable to be misunderstood. It started way back then. The general government grabbing more power than it was supposed to have. So what other critical agreement elements are included in this agreement, the Constitution? You know, I do simple quizzes for people. I have my booth, and Chris has toured the country with me, and we'll put up big signs. We got my books for sale. And I get introduced to the platform, and when I get introduced in a tea party, they call me Mr. Constitution. Pretty cool, like being Mr. Wizard. You guys aren't old enough to remember Mr. Wizard. Anyway, people will come over to my table and they'll say, oh, I know the Constitution, man. Really? Did you just say that to Mr. Constitution? I don't think that. You're about to get a little quiz here. So I'll ask him questions like, how many articles are in the Constitution? Now, I don't expect you to know. But if somebody said they know the Constitution, they should know there are 7 articles. Article 1 talks about Congress or the legislative branch. Article 2 talks about, guess, somebody tell me. Executive branch. Then Article 3 would talk about judicial. So there's seven articles in the Constitution. The 7th one doesn't mean anything anymore because it just talked about how to get the Constitution ratified. But there are 7 articles in the Constitution. Then since then there have been how many amendments? Anybody know? I'll give you a book. Who said that? You don't get to play. All right. How many amendments? There's 27 amendments. How many? Okay, I'll give away a free book real easy here. How many of those amendments were in the Bill of Rights? Okay, keep yours. All right. So I want to just cover a few more things that are in the Constitution, but what I was trying to get out here for you to get your mind around, because I want you to go home and read it, or go online and search it, or find me later and buy one. I didn't say that right here in the library. Is there any library Nazis? There was a library Nazi in here a little while ago. Anyway, soup Nazi. You know, you call who's a Nazi? Somebody you disagree with, right? Okay, or somebody who's telling me what to do right now. It could be the soup Nazi, couldn't it? Any Seinfeld fans? Come on, you guys. I'm trying to find a place where we got something going here. The soup Nazi. All right, so there's some more things that are in the Constitution, but here's a few more things. A partial listing of our unalienable rights. Next slide. Before we get to the Bill of Rights, we get to Article 1, Section 9, and that's on page 16 and 17. And here's a whole list. There's a list of some of the rights of the people in the states. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 on page 17. If you look at this, it looks a whole lot like one of the Bill of Rights, doesn't it? The right of an arrested person to be seen by an impartial judge may not be suspended. So you see some of the elements that are in the Bill of Rights are found earlier in the Constitution. 1.9.3, no law may be passed which pronounces a person guilty of a crime or which is retroactive. What's the Latin term for retroactive law? Look across the page. Ex post facto. I'm trying to wake you up. Maybe see if we can give away another book. All right, Article 4, Section 2. Those are just a couple places, but Article 4, Section 2 says the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. That sounds like there's a grant of power there. A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or any other crime who flees from justice is found in another state, that's extradition. Okay, let's talk about the citizens shall be entitled to privileges and immunities in the several states. You guys are going to be different from me here, all right? I'm heterosexual. Just a little joke there. I don't think there's any point in being gay and getting married. But you know what? Here's what the Constitution says. If you're a gay couple and you get married in one state, you come to another state, you're married in that state. That's what the Constitution says. Period. Why is it our government had enough courage to pass a Defense of Marriage Act that says that isn't true, but didn't have enough guts to pass a Defense of Marriage Amendment that says it's true? Because the Defense of Marriage Act will be held unconstitutional someday, so they won't have to deal with it. A Defense of Marriage Amendment would become part of the Constitution and could not be held to be unconstitutional because it's part of the Constitution. Does that make sense? The Constitution cannot be unconstitutional. I know the Supreme Court doesn't understand that either. Next slide. The Bill of Rights. Let's go to the Bill of Rights. This is fun. This is the part of the Constitution most people know. And that starts on page 38 and 39. By the way, there's a preamble to the Bill of Rights worth reading sometime too. You'll see that you'll be familiar with this. Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of a religion. What are the first 5 words there? Congress shall make no law. It doesn't say Congress shall not go to church. It just says Congress shall make no law. There's a big difference there between saying that Congress can't have religion and saying Congress can't specify religion. More things on the Bill of Rights. It's right there. But the Bill of Rights, I just want you to look through there and see how many rights there are. Okay, here's a book. Here's a free book. How many freedoms are guaranteed or enumerated in the First Amendment? 5. Free book for you. Keep yours, okay? Okay, now, without looking, I'll give a free book to somebody who can name them. Come on, raise your hand and do them all. Do all 5. The 5 freedoms listed in the First Amendment. You only know 1? Anybody know 5? Okay. Maybe between us we can get them. Somebody name 1.
The right to bear arms.
That's Second Amendment.
Speech.
Speech. Religion. Press. Assembly. Petition. Okay. Well, between the 5 of you got that. So in the 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, there's more than 10 rights of the people that are listed. How many are listed in the first 10 amendments? Let's say the first 8, because the Ninth Amendment's a killer. The first 8 amendments, how many rights of the people are listed? 25. Now, the founders had a debate about whether to have a Bill of Rights, but they had to do it because some states said we won't ratify the Constitution unless you promise us a Bill of Rights. Here's a remarkable thing. Our founders told the people in New York and the people in Virginia who were holding out, they said, you ratify, we'll give you a Bill of Rights. So Virginia ratified, New York ratified, and guess what our founders did? Gave them a Bill of Rights. Would you trust your government to do that today? No. Sign your life away and don't worry, I'll give you a Bill of Rights? No, you sign your life away, they'll give you a Bill of Goods. All right, here's something very important. Here, the reason there was a debate about the Bill of Rights is some of our founders said, and Jefferson initially said, he said, if we have a Bill of Rights, it's a bad idea because we only gave the government limited powers, so everything else the people still have. If we try to list everything the people still have, we'll leave something out. Right? Does that make sense? Well, they had to relent to get some of the states to ratify, but here was the beautiful language of in debate. One person said, if we list the rights, some of them will be denied or disparaged. Some of our rights will be denied or disparaged. Aha, the Ninth Amendment says on page, you'd think I'd know, right? On pages 42 and 43, let me read the original version. The Ninth Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So even though only 25 rights are listed, how many of you have children or else your parents did? Pay attention. How many of you had children or else your parents did? Okay, good. Was the right to have children listed in the Bill of Rights? No. The right to get married? No. The right to take a walk on the beach, watch a beautiful sunset, climb Pikes Peak? No. None of those rights are listed, yet they're ours. The list of rights that properly belong to us, that are none of government's damn business, is so long you couldn't begin to list it. So that's what the Ninth Amendment says. Next slide. And then we have Amendments 11 through 27 that expanded the rights of the people. Ended slavery, gave women the right to vote, abolished alcohol, repealed the abolition of alcohol, and did more things to further the rights of the people. Next slide. Compare and contrast the Ninth and Tenth Amendments, because if you can learn the principle behind the Ninth and Tenth Amendments, you'll have your mind around the whole idea of the Constitution. The Ninth Amendment is not exhaustive, and the Tenth Amendment is. Go ahead, next slide. The Ninth Amendment is a partial listing of our rights. We just covered that. But the Tenth Amendment is exhaustive. Next slide. If a power to the government is not listed, it's not theirs. So here's the difference in lists. How many of you have kids? Or your parents did? Okay, so if you tell your children, or if your parents told you, you may play in your living room, the backyard, or your next door neighbor's backyard, nowhere else. Is that a list? Is it comprehensive? Is it complete? Are those all the places you're allowed to play? Yes. Are you allowed to play in the kitchen? No. Front yard? No. Down the street? No. Okay, so I'm not saying that that's a good idea for parents, but depending on the age of the children, that might be a big enough area for them to play. Now, if you're 18, there's a serious problem with that. Another kind of list. Mom goes to the store, and she's got a grocery list that says milk, bread, and eggs. She gets to the store, and she says, oh, I'm going to need hamburger for the meatloaf, ketchup, soda. Is she allowed to go ahead and buy those things if she has enough money? Yes. So that's the kind of list that's the list of our rights. It's a partial list. But the list of where you're allowed to play was what we gave Congress. We said, here's where you're allowed to play, nowhere else. That was a complete list. If Mom's at the store and she bought the milk, eggs, and the bread, and the hamburger, and the ketchup, and she sees little Johnny in the store, and Johnny didn't ride with her, then Johnny's not playing in the front yard, the backyard, or his next door neighbors. So Johnny's out of line. But Mom's not out of line because she has authority beyond the list that she has. Our list of rights is not comprehensive. We have the right to peacefully assemble in a park, anywhere we want, anytime we want, and we don't have to ask the government's permission, and we shouldn't have to pull a permit. Tea Party Express, by the way, on its last tour, spent $100,000 on permits. They're a little testy about that. Okay, so there it is, the 9th and 10th Amendments. The 9th Amendment is not exhaustive, it's a partial listing. The 10th Amendment is exhaustive. If it's not listed, it's not theirs. And together they form a summary of the founders' intent. I'm going to wrap this in 5 minutes so we can have questions. I don't know how far we'll get. We'll just go fast. So the Constitution is a contract that bound together 13, now 50 sovereign nation states in a mutual defense pact like NATO, or a free trade zone like the European Economic Community or the North America Free Trade Agreement. It also gave the central government limited powers to do certain things that the states could not reasonably or easily do for themselves, and that's what they meant by general welfare. And the general welfare items, by the way, it'll be fun for you to do sometime, is if you go to Article 1, Section 8, and you look at those clauses, you'll see that the first several clauses are all general welfare clauses. The coining money, punishing counterfeiters, and doing post offices, that's general welfare. But when we get down to Clause 10, we punish pirates, declare war, support armies, maintain a navy, blah, blah, blah. That's common defense. So the two headings were general welfare and common defense, and then the 18 clauses specify what the government may do under general welfare and common defense. You're going to find under common defense, here's something that's not listed. Congress shall have the power to let the president invade any country he wants anytime he feels like it. It's not there. It's not in Article 2. It's nowhere in the Constitution. And guys, I was all, see, we're streaming this, ticked off when Bush was president. Isn't, now, equal opportunity hater. Can I be an equal opportunity hater for a moment? When Obama was campaigning, he hated what Bush was doing. He said he's involved in an illegal war. Hello, we still there? He said, no more bailouts. Well, you know what? The more we look at this, the more we see that the two parties are two wings on the same bird flying in the wrong direction. Next slide. And then it also describes and promises to protect our freedoms as citizens, the blessings of liberty and unalienable rights. Next slide. What do we have today? Let's move quickly. What do we have today? We have an unlimited central government that can do anything it pleases. States are puppets. Public servants have become masters. They mean to be good masters, but by God they mean to be masters. Citizens have become subjects. We've come full circle from the time we left England. And rights have become privileges. Once upon a time you had a right to peacefully assemble. Now you get permission. Today we are in the middle of a mudslide towards fascism. Now again, a fascist is anybody I don't like, but the classic definition of fascism, and here's a place where I think the Tea Party and the Occupy movement might converge. The Tea Party has historically seen the enemy as big government. You've seen me get pretty excited about big government. Occupy movement has seen the enemy as big business. Fascism is the confluence of big government and big business. When they're in bed together, big government puts political politicians in power, and those politicians then do favors for big government. You can call it lots of things. You can call it political entrepreneurship. You can call it crony capitalism. But the classic name for it, and I'm not just calling people names, is fascism, and that's where America's headed. Here's my 20 words or less, and I say it all around the country, and I said it in Washington, D.C. from the steps of the Capitol. The government we have in Washington, D.C. today is the government our founders feared and wrote the Constitution to prevent. As Mary said in my introduction, if our government was following the Constitution, there wouldn't have been a Tea Party. I don't think there'd have been an Occupy movement. Next slide. So what can we do? Well, we can do more of the same and expect a different result, but what would that be? That's the definition of insanity, right? Or we could try something different. Now, guys, this is going to blow your mind, because I say this stuff to the Tea Party, and you're going to think that I wrote it for Occupy, but I wrote this for the Tea Party. Read and understand the Constitution for ourselves. That's a good beginning, right? Explain it to everyone who will listen. Defend the basics of limited government and unalienable rights. I missed a slide here, but it's because I left it out. Demand, not suggest, not recommend, demand that our elected officials honor their oath. Now, look, we're going to get radical in a minute, but don't just vote, campaign. Next line. Attend town halls. Be in somebody's face. Visit your senator and congressman and tell them you know the Constitution even if he doesn't. Oh, here we are. There it is. Demand that they honor their oath. This is something I say to Christian people. Pray prayers of personal repentance. Maybe God is not very pleased with us. Educate yourself and others. Vote and campaign. Assemble and demonstrate. Petition. Show up in person. You know what the hardest thing for a congressman to get rid of? It's not a phone call. It's a body in his lobby. Something different. Plan B. Keep going. Plan A doesn't work. We go to Plan B, like civil disobedience, tax boycott, refuse to obey unjust laws. I got one here you're really going to like. Chain ourselves to parking meters. I put that in there because I was running out of ideas and I haven't thought this all the way through. Go underground. Barter. Form communes. Hire our own doctors. Grow our own medicine. The 18th and 21st Amendment are beautiful because the 18th Amendment brought in prohibition. The 21st Amendment did what? Repealed it. Congress at one time knew they did not have authority to ban alcohol. So they asked the states for an amendment and they got it. It turned out to be a bad idea, so we repealed it. What amendment gave them authority to regulate drugs? You're going to look for a long time. It's way past number 27. That's all I got in my Constitution. Different plan. Nullification. That means states nullify unjust laws. A great book by Tom Woods you ought to consider buying or borrowing at the library. Nullification. They probably have a copy here. Demand that Colorado nullify unjust laws. Look at the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions as a model. Secession. Now, I don't know whether secession is going to work because if we try to secede, you know what the United States will do. They'll do what they did last time. They'll kill us. But demand that Colorado secede or move to a state that will. I've said this to Republican politicians. I said, if there was a country that was as free as the United States used to be, we'd invade them. Yeah. Plan D, force. Demand that our military restore the rule of law by force. Take those tanks that we got overseas, killing innocent people and putting our soldiers in harm's way, and turn them against the people who are doing the real harm. They're doing the harm here to us at home. Teach our military the Constitution and remind them of their oaths. Because, look, I find myself in that awkward position of loving and appreciating the sacrifice of every soldier and being absolutely furious at our civilian government sending them to places and putting them in harm's way when it serves no useful or lawful purpose. But I believe our men and women in uniform will honor their oath when they understand it because they sure have the courage to do it. If they won't, at the last resort, we will. Next slide. Hopefully it never comes to this, but if it does, we need to have made up our minds in advance. And I know that as a person who goes to the Tea Party, I'm going to need the people who go to Occupy, and we're going to have to link arms and work together if the stuff ever really gets in the fan. Is freedom really worth fighting for, really worth dying for, or is it all just talk? I said a little while ago, for 3 years we've been talking about it. Looks like something's getting started now. Right now we're still trying to do peaceful things. We're voting, campaigning, holding rallies, educating ourselves and others. And you all came out tonight when you could have been doing something else. In my opinion, we may still have some peaceful options, although we may be at the awkward stage in the demise of our republic when it's too late to work within the system and too soon to start shooting. Somebody else said that. But since so much is at stake, shouldn't we do everything as if our lives depended on what we do right now today? The future of the freedom in America is at stake. The future of the free world is at stake. If the light of freedom goes out in America, where will refugees go? Next slide. Some quotes of our founders will be done. Thomas Jefferson said, "The two enemies of the people are criminals and government." Did you believe? Have you ever heard, how many of you have seen this quote before? Hardly anybody. The two enemies of the people are criminals and government. So let us tie the government down with the chains of the Constitution so the government doesn't become a legalized criminal enterprise. Is that what it is today or not?
Yes.
Next slide. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. Here's from Robert Kennedy: "A revolution is coming, a revolution which will be peaceful if we're wise enough, compassionate if we care enough, successful if we're fortunate enough. But a revolution is coming whether we will it or not. We can effect its character, we cannot effect its inevitability." John Kennedy: "Today we need a nation of Minutemen, citizens who are not only prepared to take arms, but citizens who regard the preservation of freedom as the basic purpose of their daily life." Sam Adams: "If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen." No man can suffer too much, and no man can fall too soon if he suffer or if he fall in the defense of the liberties and the Constitution of his country. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Thank you very much, Department of Homeland Security. Get your hands off me at the airport. I mean, don't you just want to strangle somebody? The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power, not wealth or luxury or long life or happiness, only power, pure power. George Orwell, 1984, he was just off by a few years. The strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny and government. Don't ever let anybody tell you the Second Amendment is about hunting. It's not about hunting. It's not even about defending your home against an invader. The reason Americans pack heat is so when their government gets too far out of line, we can take them on. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. I might go down. I'm taking a couple of them with me. Next slide. Last two slides. Winston Churchill said, "If you will not fight for right when you can easily win without bloodshed, if you will not fight when your victory is sure and not too costly, you may come to the moment when you will have to fight with all the odds against you and only a precarious chance of survival. There may be even a worse case. You may have to fight when there's no hope of victory, because it is better to perish than to live as slaves." And our last quote. We've come to a turning point, a moment for hard decisions. If not us, who? If not now, when? Thank you very much for your kind attention. So you didn't think I came here to drink tea, did you? All right, let me field a few questions. About the Constitution, about American history, about my 7 kids. Yeah.
So, are we innately at fault for allowing them to give us privileges instead of rights, such as with driver's licenses and whatnot, and with signing away a birth certificate and having a social security card and all that?
And marriage licenses and all the above.
Admiralty needs
Yeah.
to see. So where
All of those things. I was saying all of those things, but it wasn't just you and me. You see, it's been going on for generations. We were asleep at the switch. My generation is asleep at the switch. Your generation is waking up. But my parents are great people, but they were asleep at the switch. Their parents were asleep at the switch. Here's what we did, I think historically. Americans confused prosperity with liberty. As long as they were doing well, as long as they were comfortable, they would let government take a little more authority. Marriage license would be a great place to go do a little research. I mean, what business is it of the government's who's married? And we're seeing this come around full circle now. I saw a show on TV last night. I think it was on the show right after the 10 o'clock news. What's that, Nightline? Is that it? And they were talking about, it was virtually polygamy, but they call it polyamory, where it's okay. Now there's no problem if a man and 2 women or a woman and 2 men live in one house and have multiple children as long as you don't have a marriage license, no crimes committed. Wow. I mean, think about the idiocy of that. The federal government threatened to invade Utah because the Mormons were practicing polygamy, and now nobody cares. So we're seeing the idiocy come home to roost. But we've been asleep at the switch for a long time. And the better you study this, the more trouble you realize we're in, because the government is so deeply embedded in our lives that it's going to take generations of firm resistance to turn it back. Or a complete collapse of the economy. I mean, some convulsion might, but what happens in a time like that is that the government turns the troops on its own people. So here's what we're hoping. We're hoping the oath keepers, the people in the military who honor their oath and who the seriousness of their oath, won't turn their guns on their own people. Yeah.
So you feel like, the government is more responsible for the states, the way the economy is going, more than that president's fault for the way the state is running, or
right? Is it more the president's fault, or Congress's fault, or the state's fault, or what? Is that kind of your question? My view is that the federal government micromanages the economy, and when they do that, they screw it up, and when they screw it up, they blame everybody from the pizza parlor to the Wall Street banker. And it wasn't their fault. It was the government got involved in controlling them, and when government props markets up and artificially distorts them, and then the market says, we're not singing to that tune anymore, and it collapses, the government's got the microphone, and they blame us. Right here, a question.
So I'm excited to read this, thank you, because I don't know much about the Constitution, but it seems to be very clear what is written in the Constitution, and there, if I support that, if I fight for that, then are there any hidden lines or rules where they kind of snake their way out of following this?
Yes, they have all the power. There's a TV show I've watched some called Burn Notice. Anybody ever watch Burn Notice? There's a guy who's got Michael on the ropes, and he says, I went to a great deal of trouble, Michael, to hold all the cards. The government has gone to a great deal of trouble to hold all the cards, and they hold all the cards in the form of raw power. So if we stand up and we say we're constitutionalists, and they go, oh, but we have the power. And so we're going to be doing something that the hippies used to call speaking truth to power. It's a gutsy kind of thing, the kind of thing that the Solzhenitsyns of the world have done. But for every one of the famous people who came out of Poland or the Gulag who spoke truth to power and lived to tell about it, there are many who did not live to tell about it, and we may be among them. Yes?
Okay, you said yourself you've been with the Tea Party for 3 years, and you've brought this to elected officials and your grievances to them and this, that, and anything. And you yourself know that it's not working, whether it be with the Occupy and their differences with the bankers or the big business or with the Tea Party, with big government. You know yourself it's not moving. Where do you see this headed, and how soon do you see it going off track?
I think we're at the awkward stage in the demise of the republic when it's too late to work within the system and too soon to start shooting. I hope, and I don't know how many God-fearing people are in the room, but I'll tell you, I hope and pray that God will somehow intervene in our behalf, and we will, in some amazing turn of events, turn this around. But it will require something supernatural like that. I'll tell you a quote of John Adams. During the Revolutionary War, one of the delegates during the Confederation period in the, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but one of the other delegates asked him, will we win this war, this Revolutionary War? At the time, we were getting our butts handed to us. And John Adams said, he didn't say yes if we send George Washington more troops and body armor. He didn't say yes if we can elect the right people. He said yes if we repent of our sins. God was on the side of the founders. We need to invoke him to be on our side today. I believe we're on the side of right, and that God is the author of our liberty, and he may see fit to help us retain them, but it may come to bloodshed. We need to be morally prepared for that possibility. Yeah.
If the Constitution is so cut and dry as it seems to me, and it's there and it is the supreme law of the land, how come it's just so many people are confused with the fact, and then so many people say, well, that's up to the courts, and it's up to lawyers to decide what exactly that means.
Right. It's in the nature of man to rule over his fellow man. It's just the history of the world is man's inhumanity to man. From Cain and Abel, for thousands of years, from the Jews being in slavery in Egypt, from the blacks being in slavery around the world and even imported to America. The history of the world is man's inhumanity to man. So people get into power, and Lord Acton said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. People get into power and they begin to expand their power. Some of them are well-meaning, but as soon as they expand their power to do something other than legitimate things that government's supposed to do for us, they begin to run our lives. And it's been a creeping thing. One of our founders said there were more instances of the abridgment of our rights by gradual and silent encroachments, that was Madison, I think, than by violent usurpation. So gradually, stealthily, while we're prospering, government's raising taxes. While we're prospering, government is building massive armies. While we're prospering and maybe fighting some wars we had to fight, government decides to fight some wars we didn't have to fight. While we're prospering, government creates bureaus and agencies. Here's a great example. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. What could be better than to create a government agency that's going to make sure everybody has a home? The problem is that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are what they call GSEs, government-sponsored enterprises. What is that? Does anybody know what it is? It's fascism right from the get-go. It is a private corporation that is told what to do by the government, and if they make a profit, they keep the profits. If they lose money, the government bails them out. What? What? You know, and so in the name of getting more home ownership, we sat back and let them create a fascist enterprise right in our midst, and maybe half the people with mortgages are somewhere in that conundrum. So over time, government either wanting to do good, trying to build a perfect society, or trying to get reelected, or just trying to increase their sphere of influence so that people will come into their office with more money and more campaign contributions. It's a vicious cycle. And we weren't vigilant. Our parents weren't vigilant. You know what our government always says, hey, the enemy's in North Korea, the enemy's in North Vietnam, the enemy's in northern Iraq, the enemy's in northern something, right? It's always, what were the three countries in George Orwell's 1984? Oceania, you know. We're always at war, perpetual war for perpetual peace. The danger is over there. The bad guys might come in, the people who believe different than us. You know, they drive on the wrong side of the road. That's where the danger is. And while we're looking over there, they're stealing our liberties here at home. Yes?
It's hard for me to formulate, but how, if at all, you see the Constitution as dealing with this business of corporations and corporate control, you know, the person who maybe in international corporations that seem to be a big part of what we're addressing here, occupying, I suppose, it's part of control.
Well, I think the first place we can start, and the place that Tea Party and Occupy can absolutely link arms, is say, no more bailouts. No more government money for private corporations. Okay, we can disagree whether a private corporation is evil all by itself, but I think when you really get right down to it, the shoes we wear, the pants and the things we have, and the food and the prosperity we have in America here, because somebody took the initiative to market or make it or do something. So we're not against all forms of enterprise and people creating stuff, otherwise we wouldn't have a cell phone and all the cool things we have, good eyeglasses and cool-looking hats, stuff like that, right? The problem, I believe, you'll find is when the government gets in bed with business. And that's a place where rather than just rail against government, just rail against business. 10 minutes? Rather than just rail against government, just rail against business. Let's rail against the combination, the bloody fascist combination of big business and big government. Maybe one more question, because it'll take us 10 minutes to pack up.
Just two things real quick, though. You were saying, you know, angles that, I know we took on the foreclosure recently a lot, because it seems like a really good angle to approach.
Yes.
There's so many good movies on other angles to approach with that, too, but what do you think about the chemicals? Do you think they're already starting to work?
I don't know. I've heard about them, and I have friends who think about who've read me emails about chemtrails. And the only thing, I don't know how they would make the chemicals land on us and not land on them. But if they could figure out a way to make that happen, if they could put it in our water and not in theirs, they'd probably do it. Yeah.
You probably heard this over several years. People have been trying, some politicians are trying to get rid of the Declaration of Independence. Why do you think they want to get rid of that?
I don't know why they would want to get rid of it, since it's not a binding legal agreement. It was just the statement of reasons why we were separating from England, and it provides illumination about the meaning of the Constitution, so it's kind of a companion document. Maybe the reason they wouldn't want to teach it in schools, they wouldn't want us to get all uppity and start thinking we could do it over again. But if it was good enough for the founders, it's good enough for me. All right, that's going to have to be a wrap for the night. Thank you all. Great time. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you all. Thank you. I'll just take that. You keep the water. All right. Thank you. I had a pleasure. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed being here. Thank you. If you, I'm just loaning the books, so if you, unless I gave you one, if you'd leave it on the seat and I'll pick it up, I'd appreciate that. Thanks. But I've got cards over here if you want to get a copy. Let me grab some cards and hand them out. Okay? Let me do that real quick. Folks, I've got business cards.